Good. Okay, great. Hi. Thanks everybody for coming and spending a little bit of time with us today. So we want to present to you our thesis, what we've been working on for the past semester, and some findings. And of course, it's entitled Using Transparency to Optimize Cross-Functional New Product Development. So first, we want to give you a little background into us. So my name's Theriot. I have a bachelor's in industrial engineering from the US. I moved to Denmark about a year and a half ago to start my master's in technology-based business development. My fun fact is that I love cats.
Same as Emily, I moved to Denmark around a year and a half ago to study the same master. My name is Astorga, I come from Mexico, and I have a bachelor's in chemical engineering. And, well, I love tacos, of course.
So just to give you guys a little bit of insight into why we're exploring this topic, we had some interest in transparency from past projects that we've done. So for me in particular, I did a project where I learned that there was a lot of investigation going on, accumulating knowledge and information, but there's a lot of misalignment in sharing that. So there was a lot of repeated work and unawareness between employees.
So same here, I did a project with the Lego group half a year ago. It was the same issue, misalignment, very complex. People didn't know what they were actually doing or had to do. So at the end, it was just very complicated environment they were working on. So no transparency at all.
So we were interested in exploring transparency further, and we wanted to narrow the scope on cross-functional development. But before we talk about the importance of that, maybe we can highlight the other traditional sequential development. So this is kind of when you're throwing designs or ideas over the wall from one area to the next. So for instance, product development develops a design and then throws it over to process development, and now they have to figure out how do we manufacture this. It can cause a lot of issues such as the need for rework, additional resources, increased time to market, which is why it's beneficial to pursue development in a cross-functional way and also concurrently. So there are activities that product, process, and supply chain should be performing with one another concurrently in order to decrease time to market and have better quality in the product. So these are just some examples of some overlapping activities these areas would work on with each other together. So we call this concept 3DCE. And we've learned from literature and industry that these overlapping activities are really well documented, but that there is a lack in knowing how to pursue them, or specifically transparency in the communication and information. And this is essentially crucial because there's also a lot of influences that increase complexity and transparency, such as crises, changing demands and trends, legacy issues, and of course large organization characteristics. So because there was a gap here and we didn't find an evaluation method for information transparency within this context of 3DCE, this is something that we wanted to develop, and we thought this was a good starting point both for us and for companies, and we'll talk about that later. Essentially, our problem statement was, how can information transparency be evaluated in 3DCE? Where we wanted to find what were the influencing factors towards its success, and then what can you expect as outcomes and benefits from enhancing that, all which would lead into a model for self-assessment.
So how do we actually make this model? We worked the project in several iterations. The first iteration included some deep dive into literature and some interviews. We wanted to find out what were the influencing factors and the outcomes. So based on this, we started with our very, very big dive, searching a lot of different papers in the internet. We focused on topics as information transparency, 3DC, knowledge sharing platforms, and processes. So from all these papers, we came down into finding several influencing factors. After that, we tried to relate them to each other and kind of group common themes to end up with a final list of them. After that, we went into the interviews. We had 25 interviews overall. We had people from Lego, so our Lego interviewees are our stakeholders. We got also secondary case companies like H&M, Yusk, Ecusco, and so on. And we, of course, had subject matter experts in the topics that were mentioned before. So all this, all the highlights, all the relevancies came into this very, very big map that we can actually not open now because it's too heavy. And then was reorganized into the influencing factors that we found previously. So grouping together, you click, Emily, it's not working. So, so grouping together both the interviews and the literature, we found out that there are 24 influencing factors at the end, both from literature and interviews. Same happened with the outcomes. we gathered them all, grouped common factors, and at the end ended up with 6 common factors from both sources. So these are the influencing factors we found. We're not going to go into each one of them because there are a lot. But these 24 factors are divided up into 6 different categories, which therefore influence the success of information transparency. So here are the different categories. We have 3 actually in people, technological, process-oriented, and technological, and informational. So maybe I can just go into 1 or 2 of them. So for example, the people individual goes more into the characteristics of the individual person, of the stakeholder. The informational goes into the quality of the information, and the technological into the technological characteristics of the information being shared. So these are the categories we found. Same for the outcomes. We came out with 6 different outcomes here. And of course, this is based on the success of the information transparency. This is what we expect that will happen, the benefits and the outcomes that will happen from it. So increased innovation, enhanced decision-making, enhanced efficiency, enhanced coordination and planning, a lot of enhancements, as you can see. Internal and external bridging, and enhanced quality in product development.
Yep, so with the identified and cumulative factors that we found and the outcomes, we use this information to build into the creation of our assessment model. So in order to do this, we refer to some design criteria that other assessment models have used. First, that you need some sort of item development. These are concepts that the participants will score themselves against. So for us, this was the influencing factors. Next, you need some sort of scoring system. From our research, we decided to divide this in 3 different levels, where participants would rate themselves according to a factor and how consistent and systematic they are in pursuing it, where the overall categories are then displayed on a radar chart. And lastly, you need some sort of rating guidelines. So this gives participants a common understanding in the topic and how to rate themselves. So we did this with creating an introduction guideline. So this is just an example. It is what we did. The introduction guidelines here, it describes the purpose, the main categories, how would one rate themselves, and then some next steps at the very bottom. And this is an example of, for the processes category and the factors associated with that, we wrote up descriptions that correlated with each level so participants were aware and they could select where they best fit on each factor. So with the assessment model made, then we wanted to see, okay, how can we evaluate this in the real world? So we decided to do this with both a focus group, which we would get feedback on the usability and the application towards the industry for the model. And then we also had a case study where we were able to observe its effects in the real world situation. So for the focus group, we gave them an introduction guideline beforehand and asked them to rate themselves, their department, and their main stakeholders in 3DCE in regards to those influencing factors. So the focus group was made up of 5 participants from our case study department, 3 who had prior experience because they were in the interviews, and 2 who were completely new to this topic. So we reintroduced the topic, and then we presented back to them their results from the survey, and then we asked for those feedback points. And of those feedback points, we got 10 main ones. So some interesting things was that they asked for an increase in the number of levels. So a lot of them felt like it was difficult to place themselves in one of the 3 levels because they felt like they fell in between 2 of them. So they asked for more levels to rate themselves with, along with a reduction in the descriptive text. With a description for each factor on each level, it was a lot for them, and they took a long time to assess themselves. So they said you could reduce it, gave us some suggestions for that to increase the simplicity of the model. Also, the subjectivity of the level selection was interesting. Some participants felt like they belonged under a certain description, but then selected where they should be placed according to the title of the level, so outstanding or moderate or unfavorable, which kind of swayed them in how they rated themselves. They also wished for an additional explanation of the assessment model. They wanted some more terms and definitions that they were unaware of, as well as better descriptions in terms of outcomes and next steps, as well as threshold levels. So once they've rated themselves, okay, now I have my lowest scoring factors, what do I do with this? So they asked for more guidance there as well. So we took all these feedback points into consideration and enhanced the introduction guideline. So we added those terms and definitions they asked for, as well as increasing the level of assessment from 3 to 5 and giving better explanation on how can they rate themselves. We also made the assessment tool a little bit more simple. So we had the best case and worst case scenario for each factor, and then participants would rate themselves on a scale of 1 to 5 between those two different scenarios. And we also made this outcome guideline, which gave better guidance into how I go forward after I've assessed myself. So we also came up with a scheme in which to prioritize improvements. If they have similar scored low factors, then they can look at this scheme and say, okay, there's different stages of transparency. I need to improve the factors that are related to the scale that I'm on, or the stage I'm on. And we also describe the potential outcomes for them so they're better aware of what to expect.
So then we apply this to the actual case study, so our case study department in the LEGO group. So before all of this, we mapped out their as-is process. So who are they speaking with in the product supply chain and process areas? How are they speaking to each other, and so on. Sorry, I'm a bit sick. And after that, we incorporated the literature review, the interviews, the assessment model, the focus group, and some of the stakeholders' pain points, and created this 2B process model. So based on the as-is, we recommended several little tweaks they can do in the process so they can enhance their transparency, applying the influencing factors they previously rated themselves on. So finally, conclusion. So we achieved an evaluation method of information transparency in 3CE, so yay, it was done. Some contributions and findings. As I mentioned, we achieved an evaluation method where one was not found before in literature nor in the industry. We identified the influencing factors that affect information transparency and, of course, the outcomes. This serves as a starting point to assess themselves, or companies can assess themselves and stakeholders towards transparency and trying to achieve every time a better outcome. And of course, demonstrate the importance of transparency in large organizations that is sometimes not seen, but of course it's always there due to complexity in very large organizations, maybe like LEGO Group, Stibo, and so on. Our next steps is to transfer ownership of the assessment model and the findings to perhaps the lean or agile departments at the LEGO Group or somewhere like that. Of course, do further rounds of evaluation and iterations. We only did 2, but it will be nice if we can do many more so we can start going to a better way. And share our improvement suggestions with the case study department. This has not been presented to our case study department, so we hope that in the next weeks we present it to them and they can find some value in what we did. And that's all. Yeah.